Tales for Dark Nights.
Want to make sure you never miss a Chilling Tales for Dark Nights video again? Be sure to subscribe and hit that bell to turn on notifications.
Hey, excuse me. Miss, I'm talking to you.
Katie rolled her eyes as she walked past the booth. Then she took a breath, forced a smile, and turned around to face the greasy, heavy-set man speaking to her.
Yes. What can I do for you this time?
I'm sorry, but this chicken soup is just unacceptable. It's not hot enough, and it tastes like cheap stuff you buy at the value market. I thought this was supposed to be homemade.
It is, sir.
Well, can you have the cook try again? Surely he can do better than whatever this is.
Sure thing. We'll get another bowl out to you as soon as possible.
Tell him not to use as much salt. My dog wouldn't even eat this.
Katie grabbed the bowl and walked back to the kitchen.
I hate to do this to you, Johnny, but the guy says he wants another bowl of soup. He says this one is too salty or not hot enough, it doesn't taste right, something like that.
What? This'll be the third one.
Johnny threw his arms up in the air, frustrated and tired. He was a skinny, middle-aged man with a quick temper. He was also the owner of the struggling diner.
You and I both know there's nothing wrong with that soup. Everyone loves my soup. I swear, some people make it their mission in life to be jerks.
I've been serving this guy for over an hour. Can you give it one more try? I really need the tip money, even though I doubt this guy is much of a tipper.
Katie was a college student who needed every dollar she could make. She was pretty, but always looked a little run down from being overworked, studying too much, and not getting enough sleep.
Yeah, I'll give him one more. Guy thinks he can come in here and insult my food. It's almost closing time. I'm tired and ready to go home. Here you go, Mr. Food Critic.
Johnny poured another bowl of broth and noodles, and then added some different spices and some vegetables. It smelled and looked fantastic.
And one more ingredient.
Johnny peeled a large sliver of dry, dead skin off his nose and dropped it into the soup.
You're not seriously going to serve that, right?
I certainly am. I'm the boss, and I'm not making another bowl. The guy deserves it. He's one of those people who think servers and cooks are just slaves that can be ordered around.
Katie looked at the soup for a moment, trying to decide what to do.
Fine. Just because I'm ready to go home.
Katie walked out to the front of the diner where the man was waiting. He was the only customer left in the place.
Finally. It took you long enough.
Katie bit her lip, fighting back the urge to say something in response. The man grabbed a spoon with his pudgy fingers, holding it like a caveman, and then slurped up some soup in a disgustingly loud fashion. By the way he was devouring it, Katie could tell he was finally satisfied.
This is absolutely delicious. Well worth the wait. The herbs and spices, they're delightful.
Soup was spilling from the bowl onto the table as the man lapped it up like a hungry animal. Once he was finished, he got up, paid with a ridiculously large tip, and left without saying a word. It was one of the oddest customer experiences Katie ever had. The next night the man returned. He promptly sat in the same booth and waited for Katie to take his order.
Not this guy again. Hey, good to see you again. What can I get you tonight?
The man tapped his fingers together in anticipation.
I'll take the chicken noodle soup again. Please tell the chef to make it exactly like he did last night.
Alrighty, we'll get that out to you here in a bit.
Katie walked back to the kitchen and leaned up against the wall.
You'll never guess who's back. Chicken noodle soup guy.
Johnny threw his head back in disgust.
Seriously?
He says he wants the chicken noodle soup just like you made it last night.
Has he been less of a jerk so far?
Yeah, not too bad.
Okay. I'll spare him the skin soup this time.
Johnny whipped up a batch of chicken noodle soup, minus the dead skin flakes, and served it up. Katie delivered it to the anxious man. In fact, he was sweating with excitement.
One bowl of chicken noodle soup. Here you go. Enjoy.
The man quickly slurped up a spoonful right as Katie placed it on the table.
Wait. This is wrong. It's missing something. This is not exactly as it was last night. I want the exact same recipe.
Okay. I'll tell the kitchen.
Katie placed the uneaten bowl of soup in front of Johnny, unsure of what to say.
Seriously, he's sending this back again.
He says he wants it exactly like it was at the end of the night.
Frustrated and insulted, Johnny nodded his head slowly.
This guy wants the exact same thing, huh? That's fine. I'll give him exactly what he wants.
Johnny scraped some dead skin from his forehead and sprinkled it into the soup like it was table salt.
There you go. Serve it up.
Katie brought the bowl to the man in the booth. He quickly tasted it, looked at Katie with a large, jagged smile, and drank down the soup in a matter of seconds.
Oh, yes. Oh, delicious. Marvelous.
He then immediately got up, paid with another extremely large tip, and left without saying a word. The man came back every night for 2 weeks, and each time he brought along a friend who was just as odd and equally as rude. Soon the diner was packed every evening with these strange customers, all demanding the special chicken noodle soup. Something was seriously off about these people, but business was better than ever, so Johnny gave them exactly what they wanted. Katie knew it was wrong, but the tips were so incredibly good that she just ignored her conscience. Then one night, Katie walked back into the kitchen and noticed Johnny rubbing some lotion on himself. His arms, face, and neck were raw from peeling off skin. He was using himself like a human cheese grater.
Johnny, this is insane. Look at what you're doing to yourself.
Johnny hung his head for a moment.
I know. This is crazy. The business was so good. I just couldn't stop.
Katie walked towards the door.
I'm going to tell them the soup is no longer available. They can order something else or leave.
Katie walked out into the crowded diner where all of the strange characters were anxiously waiting.
I'm sorry to disappoint you all, but we will no longer be serving the chicken noodle soup. I'm very sorry. We're, out of the special ingredients.
The customers started yelling and screaming. The original chicken soup man stood up, his eyes fiery and intense.
You don't understand. We need our soup. We need it now.
The other customers continued to scream and yell. Johnny could hear everything from the kitchen. His temper started to rise, and a couple of seconds later, he completely lost it. He burst through the door and yelled at the top of his lungs.
It was skin! My skin! The secret ingredient you loved so much was my gross, dead skin sprinkled into your soup. How do you like that, huh? You come in here every night rude and demanding, treating my waitress horribly. Yeah, you tip her well, so what? That doesn't mean you can be complete jerks. No more soup, no more skin soup. You can all leave now. Goodbye.
But all the customers just sat there, silently. The chicken soup man stood up again. His stare was cold and unnatural.
Wait. It was your skin that tasted so good. So delectable.
Johnny looked around in confusion.
Yeah, I guess so. You can all leave now. Sue me, do whatever you like. I'm done with the restaurant business. Please leave.
The man took a step forward and started to drool.
It made the soup so savory. like a rare spice. It was delicious. It's magnificent. A wondrous journey for the taste buds. I must have more. And look, everyone. Look at all that delicious skin he still has.
Johnny took a step back.
You're creeping me out, man. I know what I did was horrible, but the restaurant is closed. There's the door.
The chicken soup man took another step forward as all of the other customers silently stood up, each one of them salivating and biting their lips.
But we can't leave. Oh, no, we're still hungry. And there is so much of that succulent, tasty skin to go around. Enough for all of us.
Katie realized something horrible was about to happen as the diners lumbered toward Johnny like zombies. Suddenly, the chicken soup man rushed forward with a ravenous, gut-wrenching scream. The other customers sprinted right behind him. Johnny tried to go for the back door, but there were just too many of them.
Somebody help! Anybody help!
Katie stumbled out of the front entrance, screaming so loudly she almost popped her own eardrums. She fell hard on the concrete of the parking lot and looked back to see the diners devouring Johnny, feasting on his skin like a rare delicacy and smiling like it was the best meal of their lives. She sprinted down the road looking for help, the sound of Johnny's horrific screams fresh in her mind, as well as the stench of hot, savory chicken noodle soup.
Halloween jack-o'-lanterns decorated the Lindens' front porch. Their soft glow illuminated Mark Linden's dazed expression. Sheriff Kincaid tried to appear positive as he put a gentle hand on Mark's shoulder. Having no family of his own, Kincaid could only imagine what Mark was going through. "Is there anyone we can call?" Kincaid hunkered down a bit so his thick 6-foot frame didn't tower over Mark as much. Mark's eyes were shut, and Kincaid waited patiently for him to speak. He knew Mark was an educated man, the kind that had been keeping up with current events. Mark would know that his wife wasn't dead. Not yet. The Daily Gazette article had been very detailed, more so than Kincaid had liked, about the M.O. of the Riverdale snatcher. Mark's eyes opened. "How long do we have till she's found?" The time between abduction and the discovery of the bodies, ritualistically pinned up, like a frog on a dissection slab, varied from 2 to 5 days. Away from the press, the FBI had shared with Kincaid that it really depended on how much gratification the snatcher was deriving from the current victim. "We're gonna find her," Kincaid said. "I just took the kids out trick-or-treating. We were only gone a half hour. I can't believe... Oh, God. Oh, Karen." Mark sobbed into both hands. "We'll find her." Kincaid tried to remember what church the Lindens attended. It wasn't St. Andrew's because that's where he went. "Do you go to First Community?" Mark nodded, his hand still covering his face. "Would you like me to call Pastor Johansson? I'm sure he can..." From the corner of his eye, Kincaid saw one of the deputies waving at him from the sidewalk. Excuse me for a minute, Mark." Kincaid started down the porch steps. By the time his foot hit the grass, he was angry. Whatever reason Deputy Simon had for interrupting, Kincaid knew it would be either trivial or just plain stupid. Most of Kincaid's deputies were kids, fresh out of high school, and not one of them had enough confidence to handle anything on their own. To a veteran like Kincaid, a man with 15 years as a city cop and 2 tours of duty in the Marines, it was infuriating. Kincaid met the deputy in the middle of the lawn. "What the hell is so goddamn important you need to interrupt me every 10 seconds, Simon?" Looking down, Simon seemed to be searching for words in the vicinity of his shoelaces. You know, he had told me to take pictures of the crime scene? Kincaid was hoping to get some shots before the FBI showed up and shut him out again. "Yeah. Did you forget the camera?" No, sir, I brought it," the deputy said. "Batteries are dead, though. I've been meaning to swing by the Walgreens for some new ones." Kincaid shook his head. The day he first laid eyes on Simon's resume, he saw no bullet points that listed idiot or first-class moron as his characteristics. Why did I hire this guy? I have a camera in my trunk, so never mind that. Here's what I want you to do, Kincaid said. Simon nodded, taking out a notepad. Take Mark inside to be with his kids. Then, call Pastor Johansson. Tell him what happened and ask him to come over. Then, call Karen Linden's sister. Think she's in Idlewood or something. I'm sure Mark would want her here. Times like this, a man needs the support of the Lord and his family. Did you get that, deputy? Or were the words I used too large? Simon stopped writing and then started reading aloud. Take Mr. Linden inside, call Pastor Johansson and sister in Idlewood. Got it. The deputy slapped his notebook shut and marched off toward the house. Kincaid felt an eye roll coming on, but he stopped it, sighed instead, and then headed to the street. His squad car, parked at the curb, had a disposable camera in the glove box, but he was hoping that he left his digital in the back compartment. When he reached the rear of the car, he paused a moment, remembering the huge mess he left in the trunk. To find his camera, he was going to have to dig. Glancing back at the porch, Kincaid wanted to make sure Simon was following instructions. The orders seemed simple enough, but that had never stopped Simon from screwing them up before. Simon escorted Mark into the house. He shut the door, leaving the porch vacant, save for 3 jack-o'-lanterns, eyes glowing orange. Their devilishly carved eyes cast an almost knowing stare at Kincaid. A chill crept over his neck, and he slapped it away. He never liked jack-o'-lanterns. Damn things just gave him the willies. He popped the trunk and peered inside. Yep, it was full-on mess. Jesus, the camera is probably all the way at the bottom. He reached in and lifted Karen Linden's bound feet off the spare tire and then tried to roll her further back. She still appeared to be unconscious from the blow he delivered to the back of her head. No sign of the camera, though. Damn. When Kincaid grabbed a fistful of her hair to lift her head, her eyes popped open. She tried to scream through her gag, a sock shoved so far down her throat, only the torn fringes of the toe section dangled outside her bleeding lips. Kincaid leaned in, putting his face inches from hers. Don't even think about it. Make one sound, and I'll pull that tongue right out of your pretty little head. Karen Linden blinked and sunk back into the trunk. That's better, Kincaid said. Besides, there will be plenty of time for screaming later. He released her hair and slammed the trunk closed. He glanced back at the Linden's porch, prepared to meet the watchful leer of glowing jack-o'-lanterns. But there were 2 more sets of eyes staring back at him than he'd prepared himself for. Mark and Deputy Simon stood on the porch, looking astonished. Kincaid shook his head. Oh, Simon, you're such a screw-up. The instructions were so simple. Take Mark inside. Call Johansson. Call the sister. What the hell were they doing on the porch? The deputy went for his gun, but had trouble releasing the holster strap. Kincaid knew that hiring deputies that made Barney Fife look competent would prove beneficial at some point. He cocked his head and swiftly pulled his revolver, leveling it at the deputy. Before Simon could get his weapon free, Kincaid fired. The deputy was hit square in the chest and fell back against the house. As he slid down the wall, he finally managed to unholster his pistol. The gun fell into his lap when his butt hit the porch. Kincaid turned the revolver on Mark. The frightened man dove out of the way. Kincaid fired twice, trying to hit Mark in the air, but his shot shattered the living room window instead. Mark landed out of sight, toppling a few uncarved pumpkins off the porch banister. Screams came from the inside of the house. The kids, Kincaid thought. Jesus, I am in no mood to kill kids. Neighborhood dogs started barking. Porch lights came on, and behind him, across the street, a screen door squeaked open. Damn! He lowered his weapon. Time to move on. Well, this town was about tapped out anyways. Kincaid stepped around to the driver's side of his squad car and reached for the door handle. A speeding glint of orange reflected in the car window. When he turned, the pumpkin hit him in the face. The blow knocked him back against the car. His head cracked against the lights on the roof. He slid down onto the grass, wiping pumpkin guts from his eyes. The juices stung. Pumpkin seeds slid down his cheeks like unwanted tears. His fingers grazed his nose, and he winced in pain. It was probably broken. Kincaid should have been angry, but he wasn't. Mark was now fumbling around Simon's body. Nice throw, big guy. Kincaid searched for his gun in the pumpkin innards on the ground. His piece had fallen into the gutter, hammer still cocked. He clasped it as Mark came down the steps, holding something out in front of him. Kincaid's eyes focused with a suddenness that made him blink. He brought his revolver up. Mark had Simon's gun and was rushing across the lawn, pointing the weapon and frantically searching for the safety. Kincaid chuckled. That's the spirit, fight for it. Kincaid took aim and pulled the trigger, but nothing happened. He pulled again. Nothing. He examined the revolver and couldn't believe his eyes. Pumpkin seeds, wedged in like a doorstop, were keeping the hammer from falling. He pushed the seeds out with his thumb, then brought the revolver up again fast. A pistol shot boomed and flashed before his eyes. The first shot hit his chest like a baseball bat to the ribs. The second and third pierced his gut with the burning intensity of branding irons. When the shots ended, Mark stood in front of him, silhouetted in the porch light. He was still pointing Simon's pistol at Kincaid's chest and, shaking like a child, kept pulling the trigger. Click, click, click. Good job, cowboy, Kincaid said, choking up blood. He brought his hand to his face. Pumpkin juice dripped down his fingers, mixing with splatters of crimson. Kincaid convulsed and pulled in a last shallow breath as he glanced up at the Lindens' porch. Maybe he was hallucinating, but he swore that the jack-o'-lanterns were grinning at him. Twisted grins, glowing with malevolence. Then, just before it all went black, Kincaid remembered that he had never actually seen Mark throw that pumpkin.
I'm Steve Taylor. Thanks so much for listening. As a patron of Chilling Tales for Dark Nights, you can get these stories and hundreds of others dating back to 2012, all of them ad-free and available for downloading and streaming on all your favorite devices. Not only that, but you'll get extended editions of our podcasts. Just visit chillingtalesfordarknights.com/join to choose the membership of your choice and start enjoying more horror than you can handle now. As our way of saying thanks for listening to this video today, use promo code CHILL7, that's CHILL7, CHILL7 at checkout to get a 100% free 7-day trial of any monthly membership and see for yourself what you've been missing. Thank you so much for your support. Now, double check your doors and windows. Turn the lights down low. and snuggle up. Your next taste of terror begins now.
It was another beautiful day. The sun shone brightly overhead as I lay on the cool, crisp grass, staring up at the blue sky. Blue flowers speckled the hill, swaying in the soft breeze. Nothing made me happier than sitting on the hill with Aaron, watching the clouds and the city below. "That one looks like a flower," Aaron said, pointing up at the clouds. "I see a heart and a seashell." "I wondered what the clouds looked like on the day we first kissed," Aaron mused. A flicker. I frowned. "I think it was raining that day." Aaron lazily rolled on his side and faced me. He smiled. "No, Mal. It was beautiful. Heart clouds, star clouds, swirling strings of clouds." He was rambling. I sat up and rubbed my forehead. Flashes. Sounds and pictures. "You're right," I said. "It wasn't raining then. It rained the last time we kissed. The day we broke up." "Broke up? We never broke up." Aaron traced circles in the air with his fingers and sighed happily. The sun was blinding now. I squinted my eyes against the glare. It was getting painful, boring through my eyes into my skull. I collapsed on the hill. Memories. Flooding in like a bursting dam. This isn't right. "We did break up," I insisted through gritted teeth. "I remember now. You left me in the rain. I ran home. Mom had the news on. That was the day of the first sighting." "Sighting of what? What am I missing?" I raised a hand to shield my eyes from the sun. Dust billowed up around me, and the soft cushion of grass now felt dry and gritty. "It was the day. The day. A final snap. Everything falls into place. The day they arrived." A blink, and my vision cleared. Everything cleared as the fog lifted from the crevices in my mind. I kept my hand in front of my eyes as the sun glared down at me. No, it wasn't the sun. It was a searchlight overhead. The dust whipped into a frenzy as the craft circled above us. I froze. "Who arrived, Mal?" Aaron seemed unaware of the roaring aircraft above us. It was all I could do not to run screaming. I clamped my teeth down on my hand and tasted blood. Seconds seemed like hours. By unbelievable luck, the craft moved on, dipping behind the hill. I unclenched my jaw and rubbed my hand, gasping for breath. Aaron was rambling again. "Blue sky, robin's egg blue, cornflower blue, cobalt, caddet, and sapphire." I got to my feet. We were on the hill behind the school, although it looked very different than I remembered. It had been our meeting place, back when we were dating, that is. Aaron and I were together for most of junior year, until the week before finals. We walked home in the rain, and by the time I reached my front door, we were no longer a couple. I can't say I didn't see it coming, but I was hurt nonetheless. I didn't have time to grieve, however, because that was the night of the first sighting. Ships appeared in the skies and the next stayed over. We thought it was a prank. Even the newscasters joked about the strange objects. They hovered for the next 2 days as experts flew in to try to identify the crafts. It soon became clear. These ships were not of this world. Then, the next thing we knew, videos of death and destruction were broadcast across the airwaves. Human-sized machines, at least they looked like machines, had deployed from the ships and attacked the cities below. It felt like a bad dream, nothing more. It's easy to ignore a problem when it's only visible on a screen. Plus, I had to study for finals. But then, smoke appeared in the distance. And soon after, the ships arrived overhead. Many fled the city. I thought my family would too, but when I ran home from school, scared and out of breath, I saw that my parents had evacuated without me. I hid in my room as I heard the sounds of artillery in the distance. The last thing I remembered was the loud splintering of wood as my door broke down, and the sharp tick, tick, tick of machinery as it approached my hiding place. Then, blurred images, too weak to be actual memories. I went to school, shopped at the mall, and spent time on the hill with Aaron. Happy memories. Fake memories. The sun was always shining, the neighbors always friendly. Aaron and I were still in love. Any thought of our breakup, our fights, was gone. Now, standing on the hill, I had a good view of the city. I barely recognized it. Buildings lay in ruins and trails of smoke rose in the distance. The nearest building was the school, and I could see a huge chunk of concrete missing from the side of the gymnasium. I coughed, trying to get the acrid taste of smoke out of my lungs. "Sit with me, Mallory," Aaron said. He was still lying face up on the hill. I could see now that the hillside was barren. Almost all traces of its lush green grass were gone. How long had it been since the invasion? Aaron didn't look too great. His clothes were ragged and dirty, and his dark hair was matted. It looked like he'd still been shaving every day, but I cringed as I saw red scratches down his face and neck. I took inventory of myself and realized I wasn't in much better condition. My stomach ached. I probably hadn't been eating well. I rifled through false memories. Every day I went to school, and every day I ate in the cafeteria. There must be food in there. I started down the hill, looking over my shoulder, hoping to see no machines lurking around. I glanced back at Aaron. He was staring at the sky again. I raised my eyes. A reddish haze hung in the air. I almost wish I could see the lovely fall skies again instead of this harsh reality. Aaron whistled a carefree tune, and I bit my lip, wondering if I should really just leave him there. After all, he'd left me first. I sighed. "Come on, Aaron." I grabbed his hand and led him down the hill towards the school. The school hallways were dim and smelled of mold. Aaron and I crept past the abandoned classrooms and the rows upon rows of lockers. While I crept, Aaron walked confidently, without a care in the world. "In here," I whispered as we arrived at the cafeteria. The stench was overwhelming. I pushed through the double doors, covering my mouth with the neck of my t-shirt. A swarm of flies hovered around the food bar. Stepping closer, I could see trays full of blackened, slimy food. I wasn't even sure what used to be in those trays. Have I been eating that all this time? Aaron reached out to grab a handful of what might have been peas once. I slapped his hand away. A half-empty rack of potato chips stood in a corner, so I grabbed 2 bags and gave one to Aaron. That would have to hold us over for now. Noises in the hallway. Footsteps. I plastered myself against the wall, trying to motion for Aaron to duck out of sight. No luck. But the footsteps continued down the hall, and I gathered enough courage to peek through the crack in the door. 3 kids, who I recognized as freshmen, strolled past, their footsteps echoing in the empty corridor. They didn't notice me as they happily chattered to one another. One was barefoot, with infected blisters covering her feet. Another's left arm was covered in scorch marks, the singed fabric of his shirt sticking to the burned flesh. The 3 students turned into an empty classroom, and I took that opportunity to exit the cafeteria, with Aaron in tow. As we passed the gym, I heard more sounds. The door was propped open, and inside I saw my old gym teacher, Mrs. Miller. She was holding what looked like a rotten melon, and I watched in fascinated horror as she stood before the basketball hoop, aimed her shot, and threw. The melon splattered against the backboard, sending putrid clumps of fruit and seeds spraying across the room. Mrs. Miller looked to her left, then her right, and clapped enthusiastically. "Good pass, Mike," she said, to no one in particular. Then she met my eyes. I ducked out of sight and darted toward the exit as I heard her voice echo behind me. "You're just in time! We're picking teams!" Erin caught up to me and reached for my hand as I swung the front doors open, stepping out into the red, hazy world. I brushed his hand away. I should ditch him, I thought. But I couldn't bring myself to send the sad, brainwashed ex of mine away. Call me sentimental, if you will. A can clattered to the floor, and I willed myself not to panic. We were in a small grocery store on Lexington, stocking up on supplies. I didn't have much of a plan yet, but I figured we might as well gather enough food to leave the city. There were machines still patrolling the streets. I'd seen 3 on our way here. Luckily, I'd been able to hide each time, pulling Erin along with me. I didn't know how long my luck would hold out. I picked up the can and glanced around. No one seemed to notice the clamor, although there were at least 5 brainwashed people roaming the store. It creeped me out. They walked like they were in a daze, performing their usual tasks as they went about their day, unaware that their world had been flipped upside down. I shuddered to think that I'd been like that too. What made me snap out of it? The floor creaked behind me and I jumped. Spinning around, I saw it was a middle-aged man wandering through the aisles. I took a deep breath and steadied myself, trying to calm my pounding heart. "You're free, aren't you?" the man said. I looked at him warily. "Yeah, I'm talking to you," he said. His voice was clear and steady, low, but not a whisper. "You're not brainwashed like the rest of them, are you?" Relief flooded through me. I'm not alone. For the first time since I woke up on the hill, my face broke into a smile. "Yes! I thought it was just me," I whispered. "Must have just snapped out of it, have you?" Before I could answer, he continued. "You couldn't have lasted this long otherwise. The way you're acting." "What do you mean?" "Sneaking around, jumping at every sound. You stand out like a sore thumb. You need to blend in with the brain cases, or they'll catch you and turn you back into one. Keeps you from fighting back." I nodded. He seemed to know what he was talking about. "Are there more of you?" "A few. Some, like me, have been free since the beginning. They never got to us. Others, like you, snap out of it after a while." "How? I'm not even sure what made me come to." "To be honest, we're not quite sure. Some think a memory slips through the cracks, one that clashes with the bright, happy world you're trapped in, and some think it's completely random." I thought about that for a minute. I'd been entertaining dreams of finding my friends and family, depending on if I forgave my parents for abandoning me, and freeing them from this illusion. I at least had to save Erin. I couldn't keep dragging him around with me. But if it was random, what chance did I have of saving them? "I want to come with you," I said to the man. That should be my first step, finding others like me, others who could help me. Erin rounded the corner. He was holding a box of cereal and a beach umbrella. "I'm ready, Moll," he said. The man pointed at Erin. "Is that brain case with you?" "Yeah." "No," the man said, shaking his head. "If you want to come back with me, you have to ditch your friend here. He'll compromise our position." "He's not my friend," I said. I sighed and shook my head. "But I can't leave him here." The man tugged at his thinning hair. "Sorry, kid. Wish I could help." He started making his way to the door. I wanted to run after him, and I looked back and forth from Erin to the man. Wait. The man turned around at the door. He pursed his lips as if he were making a difficult decision. "I'll tell you what," he said. "Meet me at the clock tower on Oak and 5th tomorrow. 3 o'clock in the afternoon exactly. No brain cases or no deal." "Thank you," I whispered. He gave me an encouraging smile. "I believe that you can break people out of the spell. You just have to try hard enough." The door tinkled as the man exited the store. My mind raced. Save Erin. Meet at the clock tower. Don't get caught. All right, Aaron, I said with new determination. We have work to do. I heard it before I saw it. The sharp, steady clicking of metal against sidewalk. A machine, a jagged assortment of black metal shapes, advanced toward us on spindly appendages. I fought against the instinct to flee, remembering what the man, the one who'd been free, had told me yesterday. You just need to blend in. The machine was just over a block away. Between us, an older gentleman ambled out of an alleyway. He was holding a leash, dragging something behind him. I gasped when I saw it was the long-dead corpse of a small dog. The man took no notice of the machine, even when it approached him and lingered by his side. I couldn't be sure, but it looked like the machine was inspecting him, watching for any unexpected reaction. The man reached down to pet the decaying dog. My stomach churned as I saw a patch of fur slue right off the corpse and fall to the ground. Good boy, the man said. The machine seemed satisfied and continued on its course, towards Aaron and me. Aaron didn't take notice as it hovered around him, but I did. My heart raced and I broke out into a cold sweat. The machine must have decided Aaron was no threat, because after a brief look at him, it turned on me next. For a second, I stood completely still. It took me a moment to realize that that was just as suspicious as running, so I willed myself to move forward, one foot after the other. Aaron was strolling ahead, and I matched my footsteps to his. The machine followed. A bead of sweat ran down my face, but I kept my face passive. My eyes straight ahead. Please, let this work. Please, let this work. Finally, the machine moved on, making its way down the quiet street. Once the sounds of the machine faded away in the distance, I grabbed Aaron's arm. We were close. We crossed the street, and I led him around the side of the building, into the shade of a large marquee. A few of the letters had fallen off, but I knew what the sign said. Morning Star Cinemas. There were others like us, the man had said, others who were free from the illusion brought on by the machines. I could join them, but I couldn't bring Aaron. Not unless he was freed. I thought I could snap him out of it if I could only get him to realize the bright, happy world he saw was a lie. If I could just unlock an unhappy memory, I thought, I could bring the lie crashing down. I had until 3 o'clock to free Aaron and meet the others at the clock tower. Do you remember this place? I asked. Aaron idly glanced up. Are we going to the movies? Yep, we're going to the movies. It was dark inside the theater, and I was glad I brought a flashlight from the store. The lobby looked eerie, the beam of light glancing off the glass sides of the popcorn maker in the back of the room. I made my way down the dark hallway and crept into the nearest theater. Aaron followed. There was a hole in the ceiling. I had no idea if it was caused by the machines or by our own forces, but it let a welcome ray of light into the room. I could see the hazy red sky above. As we entered the theater, I heard a low muttering coming from the seats. Half a dozen people sat in the rows of seats, their vacant expressions trained at the empty screen. A quiet laugh echoed through the room, multiplying as each of the audience joined in. I shuddered at the eerie chorus. That's my favorite part, one person said, and I could only imagine what illusion-induced film was playing in his mind. Aaron and I took a seat in the back of the theater, where we'd always sat on our dates. I was thinking of one night in particular, so I sat to his right, just the way it'd been. Do you remember when we came here the night before homecoming? Shh, you're missing the previews. I ignored him. The movie we were going to see sold out, so we chose another. I shifted in my seat so I was facing Aaron. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared ahead at the screen with an empty smile on his face. That was the only time I'd seen you cry, I said. It was just a movie, sure, But I know you felt something. Something sad and hurtful. Aaron laughed. Watch this part, Mallory. It's great. Aaron, please, you have to remember. I searched for his face for the slightest flicker, a sign that something real made it past the illusion. Just one sad memory, that's all I needed. Aaron chuckled louder, and it rippled through the rest of the audience. I put my hands over my ears. There had to be another way, a worse memory. You must remember this, I said. We were in Aaron's backyard. There was a swing set and a trampoline, though Aaron probably hadn't used them in over a decade. The trampoline was broken. Its once taut cloth surface lay tattered on the ground. I wasn't sure if that was from the machine's destruction or if it had been like that for some time. Aaron stepped inside the trampoline's metal frame and began to jump on the bare dirt below. You fell off the trampoline and broke your arm when you were 6, I reminded him. You told me it was the worst pain you'd ever felt. Jump with me, he said. I'm soaring so high. Small plumes of dust rose where his feet hit the ground with dull thuds. I shook my head in frustration. I wasn't getting through. With a glance at my watch, my heart sank. It was almost 2 in the afternoon. I had an hour to snap Aaron out of it and arrive at the clock tower, or go myself and leave him. Could I bring myself to leave him? It was a wonder any of us had survived so long in this state of childlike wonder. I didn't have faith he'd last much longer. There was one memory I'd been avoiding. Maybe because it was much worse for me than Aaron. For all I knew, it was a happy memory for him. But I was out of time. I had to try. As we neared the familiar street corner, I broke into a run. I stopped when I reached the street lamp, panting for breath. My throat burned and my mind filled with the painful memory of that day. It was raining. Aaron caught up, looking puzzled at my words. Before he could respond, I continued. We were walking home from school like we always did. We had been fighting again, worse than usual. I thought you'd leave and go home by yourself, but there you were, waiting for me. Aaron yawned. I'm tired. Can we go home? I grabbed him by the shoulders. You have to remember this. You stopped right here on this corner. It was pouring by then. You told me you didn't want to speak to me anymore, how you couldn't stand to even look at me. It was over, you said. It had been over for a long time. I fought back tears as the terrible memories, the ones I'd blocked myself with no help from the illusion, came rushing back. The fighting, the screaming, the manipulating. Neither one of us had been faithful, but neither one of us deserved it. Aaron had broken up with me, but I pushed him to it. I didn't have the guts to do it myself. You said you hated me, I was shouting now. And then you kissed me. How dare you not remember that? A single raindrop fell from the sky and landed on my cheek. I looked up just as the skies opened up. And water fell from the heavens. Just perfect. But when I looked back, Aaron's face was wet, and not from rain. I cautiously leaned forward, my heart pounding, and kissed him. How dare you not remember that? Click, click, click. The sound of machines drawing near. The noise mingled with the sudden onslaught of rain, but I didn't pay any notice. Mallory? Aaron's voice was barely a whisper. What's going on? It worked! He looked so lost, and for a moment, every awful emotion I had been feeling was wiped clean. The clatter of machinery grew louder. I saw Aaron's eyes grow wide, and I realized there was no time to explain, no time to convince him to stay calm and stay free. Wait until you can't see me anymore, and then go to the clock tower. There will be friends there to help you, I whispered in his ear. I'm sorry. I think he said something in return, but I was already running down the street. I blew past the machine and heard a mechanical whir as it picked up speed and followed me. I ran faster than I ever had before and thought, maybe I'll actually get out of this one. That thought vanished as I turned a corner and nearly crashed headfirst into 2 other machines waiting for me. Can't win them all. The grass felt soft against my back as I lay on the hill behind school. Blue flowers dotted the pristine landscape. Pretty clouds soared overhead, and I named their shapes aloud. There was no one to hear me, of course, but why should that stop me? It was another beautiful day.
The early morning sun poked through my window, let me know it was time to get to work. I yawned, stretched, and put on a pair of shorts with a t-shirt. I could hear the cardinals chirping hello to the serene August morning. It was already in the mid-60s, which meant a very warm and humid day would be on its way. The kids would be here soon, and I needed to make sure everything was ready for the weekend. As the sun inched over the horizon and burned away the morning haze, I checked the cabins and found everything in place for the new campers. Food packed the cabinets and freezers in the mess hall, enough for a large contingent of children. This would be the last weekend of summer camp for the year. Once these kids were gone, the Winoka Nature Reserve would be shuttered and forgotten until spring returned to claim the reserve from winter's icy grip. I checked the list Roger had given me at the beginning of the camp season. I went through the list of participants and stopped at the last unchecked date. This weekend, I would help host the boys of St. Michael's Orphanage. Sorry, we don't use the word orphanage anymore. Political correctness sent out a memo calling St. Michael's a foster child care center. It doesn't matter what name they give it. St. Michael's houses all the unwanted children from broken and abandoned families. These kids were the modern-day wretched refuse the Statue of Liberty talks about on its base. If not for the sizable donation from the Joseph Swift Foundation, these kids would never step foot in Camp Winoka. They were truly the lost souls, and if not for a few caring individuals, would have slipped through the cracks of society without concern. For most of the camping season, snot-nosed rich kids ran around Winoka like they were personally responsible for nature itself. They were privileged, spoiled, and couldn't give a rat's ass about communing with nature and its wonders. The upside to those little rich kids was the money their parents shelled out for us to entertain and amuse their rotten brats for a week. Their cash kept Camp Winoka running and afforded the opportunity to bring in less fortunate kids for camp. Although most of these young souls had never been out of the city, they appreciated the commune with forest life. After 30 years as camp caretaker, this was my payment, seeing the wonder in their eyes when presented with the majesty of nature. With everything in order, I jumped on the camp's ATV and drove back to my Airstream trailer nestled off the camp proper. Looking in my bathroom mirror, I was a little unkempt. I swept back my salt and pepper hair, tied a rubber band around my ponytail, brushed out my beard, dabbed on some deodorant, and slipped into a clean yellow polo shirt with the camp crest. It was about 8 a.m., and the camp would come to life with new explorers soon. I fired up the ATV and went to base camp to await the last campers of the season. I had just finished a Red Delicious when I heard the bus rolling down the dirt road. The Winoka Nature Reserve was an isolated slice of forest in the southeast corner of Ohio. It covered over 400 acres of privately protected woods and wildlife. Hiking trails wound through the forest without a telephone pole or a skyscraper littering the landscape. The cabins, mess hall, and even the suspension bridge across Taylor Ravine were all built with solid 19th century ingenuity. A single dirt road was the only way in or out of the reserve. Roger was the first off the bus. As usual, he was filled with energy and covered in summer sweat. Although most counselors were teenagers trying to add a community service star to their college transcript, Roger had fallen in love with Camp Winoka and decided to make it a yearly commitment. He was an able-bodied guy, so I appreciated the help.
Jackson, how's it going, you old mountain man?
Roger thrust out a hand. I shook it. Everything's primed and ready to roll, Roger. While the other counselors tended to the kids, Roger slung an arm around my neck and walked me away from the unloading bus.
Listen, Jackson, there are 22 kids this year, all boys, so we can use cabins A, B, C, and we'll leave cabin D empty. There's a couple rowdy ones, but nothing we can't handle. After all, if we can't handle 24 kids for 3 days, we're in the wrong business.
He laughed and looked at me with a concerned expression.
How's your arthritis?
Good days and bad, Roger, I supplied, but nothing to keep me out of the game.
Good to hear. I'll get with you when the kids are done settling in, and we can go over the schedule. Here's to a great weekend.
He slapped me on the back and returned to the bus. The kids unloaded and settled into their assigned cabins without incident. From the checklist Roger gave me, the kids were 9 to 13 years old, most in the lower part of the age range. Just like every year, we gathered them together in the mess hall for introductions before lunch.
Good afternoon, campers.
Roger cheerfully bellowed. He was met with a semi-enthusiastic hello by the campers.
My name is Roger Lovek, but you can call me Roger. I'm the head counselor for your stay at Camp Winoka, and this...
He pointed to the 4 yellow-shirted counselors.
...is Gary, Glenn, Mitch, and Tom. And this is Mountain Man Jackson.
He pointed to me.
He takes care of the campground all year long and keeps it looking great. If you ever have any problems during your stay, please let myself or one of these men know. We are here to make sure that you have fun and stay safe.
Roger glanced to his clipboard.
With that in mind, we do have a few rules.
The children heaved a collective sigh.
Come on, guys. The rules are here for your protection. The nearest city is 45 minutes away. The nearest hospital is over an hour. Play safe, stay safe, right? Rule number 1. Everyone needs to be in their assigned cabin by 9 o'clock. When you're in the wilderness, the temperature drops about 20 degrees once the sun sets. Unlike the city, there's no streetlights. It gets really dark and very cold quickly. Rule number 2. Every camper will be assigned a buddy. Your buddy is to be with you at all times. Well, unless you're going to the bathroom.
Everybody chuckled at this.
Rule 3. Unless you're being led by a counselor, stick to the blue paths. If you look at your packets, you'll see the paths I'm talking about. Blue paths are safe to walk with your buddy. Red paths are trails approved for walking only when a counselor is with you. The black paths are off limits and are for staff members only. Rule number 4. Trail bikes, paddle boats, and canoes are available on a first-come, first-served basis. The sign-up sheet is located on the bulletin board outside the main cabin. We put up a new sheet after dinner for the next day of unscheduled activity time. And, before you ask, the ATV is for counselor use only. Rule number 5, be respectful of your counselors and fellow campers. We have opened this once-in-a-lifetime chance to enjoy nature. Take advantage of it, not the people around you, and you'll have a great time. What do you say?
The kids offered a civil round of applause. Roger waited for the smattering to die down.
And this year, we are offering a special surprise to the best campers. We will be choosing 6 of the best campers for a Sunday night excursion to the Light of Hope Ruins.
Some kids smiled and nodded.
I can see some of you know the legend. We'll be camping there for the night with an open pit cookout, s'mores, and maybe, just maybe, do a little ghost hunting. How does that sound?
The kids erupted in applause and whistles. I couldn't help but chuckle to myself.
Great! Be on your best behavior, and you can be one of the chosen few. Now, let's all get in line for lunch. We have a lot to see today.
The kids continued to applaud as they lined up for the afternoon meal. I never minded putting meals together when I was in the Army, so it was an easy task. Every day, one of the counselors was assigned to KP with me. Unfortunately, they usually bitched and moaned about it. I never understood that attitude. I mean, get it over with. Don't drag it out by complaining the whole time. Besides, these kids were grateful to have a bologna sandwich, fruit cup, and celery with peanut butter. It was those rich kids that had special menu requests that was the real pain. Needless to say, there are no vegetarians when you're poor. The next couple of days flew by without incident. I'll be honest, I've never seen a group of lightly supervised kids not get into a little mischief when the counselor wasn't around. I guess the Light of Hope camp out was a real draw. For those of you who do not watch those ghost hunting programs, the Light of Hope ruins are one of those places that have spawned many supernatural myths around them. This made life hellish for me. Matter of fact, I spend the majority of my off-season time running off idiots with their ghost detecting equipment because if anyone gets hurt, the sanctuary would be liable for any injuries sustained. However, it never stopped anyone from spinning a yarn about a campfire or two about the place the media calls Gore Orphanage. Light of Hope was located 3/4 of a mile from the main campground, close to the interstate annex. The 6 winners were easy to choose and were elated when we called their names at the Saturday night assembly. The kids were a bit skittish due to the fact that we had to take one of the black paths through the dense woods, but Roger and I made sure they tucked their pant legs into their socks to prevent ticks and chiggers from getting a free ride to the campsite.
Mr. Jackson, what's that?
Close to the campsite, a kid named Connor Watson pointed into the woods where a clearing appeared. See those old markers? That was a graveyard over 100 years ago, I said.
That's creepy.
The boy had a worried face as I patted his head. Don't worry, Connor. Ghosts don't exist. You're safe. For now. I offered him a wink. We made the site about an hour before sunset and set to the task of putting up the 2 tents. Each tent could fit 8 people comfortably, but were a bit of a pain to set up due to the remnants of brick and stone left from 100 years ago. By the time we had them up, the sun had mostly melted into the horizon. The 6 winners were a bit rowdy and anxious, but we kept them occupied. Roger took half the kids out to forage wood for the campfire, while I took the other half to help prepare dinner. Although Connor was not too happy about deer stew, the others were unaffected. Mark Treasure acted as almost ghoulish in his desire to try it. We set the gallon pot above a healthy fire. Even though every kid was thinking about Gore Orphanage, none of them asked about it. By the time we were ready for s'mores, they were practically chomping at the bit for a ghost story. I served the kids some homemade apple cider I warmed over the fire to keep the cold away while they finished their chocolate, graham cracker, marshmallow treats. Roger decided he would begin weaving the supernatural tale.
So, has anyone ever heard of Gore Orphanage?
All hands went up.
But does anyone know why it's called Gore Orphanage?
Most of the kids shrugged.
Well, back in the late 1800s, there was an orphanage located on this very spot. You see the bricks and timbers lying around our campsite, right?
They all nodded.
It was once a huge building that housed almost 200 children. It was originally called the Light of Hope Orphanage.
I jumped in. These kids they took in weren't good kids like you. They were mostly runaways and kids that weren't right in the head, and some were downright mean. But they were too young to go to prison, so the authorities put in Light of Hope for rehabilitation. You kids know about what that means. Some nodded, intently listening. That means they hoped the orphanage could help them become good, productive citizens.
But some couldn't be rehabilitated.
Roger sighed.
Some children were dangerous and had to be chained up at bedtime. Some children were locked downstairs in the basement and were only allowed out for an hour a day. the worst of them, were isolated in small, lightless parts of the basement and never allowed to play with other children.
The worst of them was a kid by the name of Lowell Frudd, I continued. Think of the meanest kid you know. Now, times that kid by 10. That's how mean he was. Nobody knows what made him so mean, or if he was born with the spirit of the devil with him. His first night in Light of Hope, he bit off another kid's ear. They tried chaining him, but he'd pick the locks and hurt other kids. So they put him downstairs where he got free again. This time he hurt a kid so bad that by the time the orderlies got him to the infirmary, the kid was almost dead.
Lowell had broken every finger and toe on the kid, joint by joint,
added Roger.
And then he started on the kid's limbs, snapping his arms and legs one by one.
Roger accentuated this by breaking some dry sticks and tossing them into the campfire. As you can guess, Lowell had become far too dangerous to leave around other kids, I offered. The people in charge decided to lock him away in the basement. They put him in a straitjacket and only let him out for a shower once a month. When they let him to take a shower, they'd also wash down his cell. Let's just say he didn't have the cleanest of bathroom habits.
But how did he eat?
Connor, the youngest of the Winters, asked.
Good question. Once a day, an orderly would bring in a bottle of liquid food, oatmeal or gruel, and force a tube down his throat. They'd empty the bottle straight into his stomach. That method worked until he bit off one of the orderly's fingers. After that, they had to strap him down to feed him.
Come on.
Mark Traeger, the oldest of the Winters, rolled his eyes in disbelief. It's true. A quick, serious look put Mark's doubt in check. They used an old, rusty C-clamp to force his mouth open. Lowell fought them, but only succeeded in breaking off pieces of his teeth. They found records where orderlies refused to feed Lowell because of his creepy, jagged-toothed smile.
Oh yeah, I forgot about that, Jackson.
Roger hid a laugh at my improvisation behind a cough.
Everyone that came in contact with Lowell Frudd was convinced that he had the devil in him. But what could they do? The only way to leave the orphanage was either through an adoption or when they turned 18. People knew no one would adopt Lowell, and it was many years before he was old enough to legally leave. So in that small basement cell, he stayed, and years passed.
Roger suddenly stood up.
Sorry, boys. I have to go relieve myself. Jackson, do you mind finishing the story?
I don't know, Roger. Do you think they can handle the rest of the story? To this, the children responded with a chorus of protests. Okay. I'll tell you the rest of the story, as long as you guys promise to clean up afterward and hit the bed. Deal? All agreed, and I passed around the rest of this steaming apple cider, while Roger headed into the woods for privacy. After a few years in the hole, the people who ran the orphanage relaxed and let Lowell out of the straitjacket. They even let him eat real food instead of pouring gruel down his throat. It looked like he might have been turning the corner and was going to make a good citizen after all. However, he had these eyes that looked like they housed the fires of hell. It unnerved everyone who met him. But he was behaving, so he got more and more privileges back, although he was still kept in the basement. Then, on an August night in 1910, a night like this one, it happened. Lowell Frudd picked the locks on his shackles. Any other person held prisoner for years would have made for the doors and escaped, but not Lowell. He went to the storage shed and got several cans of kerosene. Back then, kerosene was used in lamps instead of the light bulbs that we use today. He crept through the night, pouring gallon upon gallon of kerosene all around the building, in the hallways, and any other place he could move without drawing attention to himself. He poured a final trail of kerosene out the main doors and wedged a piece of lumber across the doors, jamming them closed. And then he put a match to the kerosene. The boys gasped. They were hooked. And in that dark night, much like this night, Lowell Fudd laughed as he watched the orderlies and children helplessly pound on the doors and windows as the flames grew taller and hotter. Survivors say he sat down on the front lawn and watched it all burn to the ground, his red eyes glowing, smiling his broken smile.
What a bunch of bull,
offered Mark. You think so? I asked. Here are the facts, young man. On that August night, 172 children and employees died, burned alive. Only 17 children and an orderly survived. By the time fire trucks responded, it was too late. All the firemen could do was watch the Light of Hope orphanage burn to the ground and listen to the dying screams of the trapped orphans. In case you've forgotten, you're sleeping in the ruins of Gore Orphanage. Oh, and there's one other fact I should share. The children all held their breath when they asked in unison, "What?" Lowell Fudd's body was never found. The local sheriff's office searched the woods for a week, but they found no survivors, nor did they find Lowell Fudd. The only trace of Lowell was where the survivors said he was sitting on the lawn. A single word was burned into the grass. Home. People say Lowell Fudd roamed the Winoka woods like an animal, wild animal, until his dying day. Some say his spirit still haunts these woods. And on certain nights, a night like this one, you can hear the wailing of the orphan children, warning the living when Lowell Fudd is lurking about. Wait. Listen. The kids looked at each other as the night sky covered the woods in darkness. Only the occasional crackling of the fire interrupted the silence. Almost on cue, a thin, high-pitched moan filtered through the surrounding trees.
What was that?
Connor sputtered. I have no idea, I said flatly. Just stay near the fire. It was then I saw Connor, mouth wide open, pointing toward the woods. One by one, the other kids followed his finger. In the tree line, 2 small red orbs the size of human eyes glowed. And from the thing in the tree line came a single guttural word. The children froze. Their panic drenched the area. The thing advanced again, and they all began shrieking, but huddled close to the fire. Mark even pulled a partially burning stick from the campfire and held it in front of him. It repeated, drawing closer to the campsite. The children were seconds away from blind panic. I exclaimed, "Lowell Fudd, it can't be!" The thing burst from the tree line and into the light of the campfire. The children offered one more unified scream before realization hit them. It was Roger.
Gotcha!
He laughed, walking up to the campfire. He showed them his glasses with the red LED lights and sat down on a log next to the fire. You kids should know better. I couldn't contain my laughter. Ghosts don't exist. The kids offered weak protests to the prank, but Roger and I couldn't stop laughing. Once the adrenaline surge died down, the kids complied to our wishes and went to their tents. Roger and I made sure all the boys were secure in their sleeping bags before we returned to the fire.
That worked better than I thought,
said Roger.
I didn't believe you about the moaning thing.
Earlier that week, I had told Roger about how the trucks driving the interstate close to Gore Orphanage caused a sound which, when filtered through the dense forest, sounded like an otherworldly moaning. Many paranormal investigators reported it as evidence of ghosts, but it was quickly debunked as passing big rigs. However, we were going to take advantage of any free story elements we could.
Did everybody have their fill of cider?
Roger looked at the stack of empty cups. No problem there. I stood and stretched. We got a big day tomorrow. Game over.
Is it?
Roger smiled. The kids slept like logs. Roger and I found it difficult to wake them up, in fact. I guess I had put too many sleeping pills in the apple cider. The next morning, the kids made their groggy way back to the main camp and prepared for the return to St. Michael's. I smiled and waved at children whose names I would soon forget. Well, maybe I'd remember one. I'm sure the bus ride back to St. Michael's was uneventful, with the exception of the winners regaining their wits long enough to ask where their fellow orphan was. Roger would handle it with his usual charm, like he had done in the previous years. Probably some excuse like an asthma attack, spider bite from a brown recluse, or some such nonsense. It didn't really matter. There was always a new batch of bright-eyed junior counselors every year. A missing child on the books meant an additional $60,000 went straight into the administrator's pocket. All the angles were covered. Orphans are the lost souls of society and would never be missed. Roger joined me later that day. We strolled into a cabin, Cabin D, with uncontrollable grins. Connor Watson, eyes a mixture of uncertainty and terror, lay bound and weeping in a corner of the cabin. I told you, Connor, ghosts don't exist. But monsters? Monsters are real. I drew my knife and closed the cabin door.
Gormley ran a stubby finger across his lips. They were leathery and cracked. He'd had nothing to eat the previous day but coffee and sweets, and he'd been up all night writing. His tongue felt furry in his mouth, like the tail of some anxious little animal hiding in the dark hollow of a rotting stump. He was staring out the single window of the kitchenette at the back of his trailer, eyes fixed upon the mailbox, which seemed miles away, standing alone in the early morning fog. Soon the postman would show up, and once again unwittingly play Gormley's harbinger of doom. The thought made the fat little man smile, and his lower lip split down the center. A small bead of red bubbled from the slit, and Gormley raked it into his mouth with square yellowed dentures. He took another swig of his coffee and got up to pace the floor. The postman was a bit late. Perhaps it was the fog. Gormley himself couldn't recognize much outside his window. The blacktop road that led back to town appeared to have drowned in the murk. The dry brambles of the thicket occasionally revealed their twisting, jagged tips as the fog slithered through the spaces between the branches. The gloom emanated from the woods outside as if exhaled by the ancient, wicked lungs of some unseen demon. Gormley wanted to step out and look toward town to see if he could see any approaching fog lights, but he knew he'd be wasting his time. He sat back down at his shabby little table and unwrapped his last peppermint candy. He looked at the disorganized stacks of paper in front of him, printed photos of children, photos from yearbooks, sports teams, vacations, all of them emblazoned with the same word in thick, bold lettering. The word missing. Gormley perused the photos as if he were picking out a steak at a butcher shop. He would pick up each photo and study it. He'd read the accompanied information, and he would deliberate. His criteria weren't strict. Mostly, he based his decision on how happy the child looked in the picture. Gormley hated their smiles. If the child repulsed him enough, he would place the photo to the side in a special pile. Once he'd whittled his list down to one, he'd read up on the case. When and where the child disappeared, what they were wearing that day, where they'd been spotted since. If they'd been spotted since. He'd research all he could about the child's parents, siblings, if he or she had any pets or participated in any extracurricular activities. He'd even try to learn what the child's favorite color was, if he could. Information like this was valuable to his work, and the internet made things so much easier. It hadn't always been so easy. It used to take him up to a year to get the information he needed to produce one letter. Gormley felt pride in the fact that this year alone, his first year of retirement, he'd been able to produce a very convincing letter every couple of weeks. Thank the good Lord for technology. He singled out a photo, the subject of his latest work, and he regarded it with an obnoxious sneer. The little boy in the picture was nauseatingly happy. He was wearing a cap with an emblem of a cartoon tiger hitting a baseball, and a t-shirt in matching blue and orange. The boy held a small trophy in his hands, and he looked so damned proud of himself. Gormley reclined in his chair and thought of the letter sitting in the mouth of his lonely mailbox.
Dear Mrs. Ableton, your worries are at an end. I'm the man who 4 years and 7 months ago took your boy Trevor from your car whilst you shopped. We sat and watched you return with your gallon of milk before we drove away. You may consider yourself lucky. He did not suffer long, and he remained a virgin. I hope that you have since learned to lock your doors, for men like me are everywhere.
And went on for 4 full pages depicting the most believable abduction, torture, and murder scenario that Gormley could envision, custom detailed for little Trevor Ableton. Gormley was especially proud of the bit about the jar of spiders. He'd learned about the boy's arachnophobia, and such a particularity was too exquisite to omit. In his eyes, Gormley was helping these families get over it all, move on with their lives. He put a stop to their uncertainty. Most of all, he gave them something to hate. And what a great motivator that was. Hate was what got him up and cracking before the sun could show itself. Hate was what had fueled him all of his life. Hatred was what made him exceptional. Other children had been spoiled. They lived under the illusion that somebody cared about them. And if somebody didn't, then at least that somebody should care. Gormley's expression curdled at the very idea. He could almost taste those thoughts of false love and feigned affection gurgling up the back of his throat like bile. And he fought them back by lapping at the dissolving peppermint in his mouth. The whole love thing was a joke. Parents really cared for children as children cared for their toys. as objects of dreams and fantasy and ultimately disappointment, to be broken and forgotten when playtime ended. The amount of love given was only equal to the child's usefulness. Gormley had learned that lesson early in his youth, and it had made him tough and cruel. It had made him exceptional. Because of the remoteness of his property and his disagreeable comportment, Gormley didn't get many visitors. He liked it that way. Often he would go days without seeing anybody at all, except for the postman. And the postman was only ever seen from Gormley's single front window. The postman both excited and disgusted Gormley. His father had been a postman. That fact alone was enough to spawn a black aversion to any and all postal workers, and for years, even long after the old man died, looking at a mail carrier made Gormley ill. Every time he did, he would hear the rusty screech of his father's truck. He would smell the beer-tinged halitosis all over again.
What are you doing, boy? What are you doing? I told you not to touch yourself like that, boy, you nasty little bastard.
He would hear echoes of garbled curses and shouts.
What's wrong with you, boy? Don't you understand?
He would feel the shoves, the slaps, and the punches.
What'll happen when you touch that nasty little thing? What's wrong with you?
Before Gormley started his crusade, the postman delivered him nothing but pain. But this, as it turned out, was a blessing in disguise, and Gormley was perceptive enough to see it. Through his work, he'd turned the thing he hated most into his personal lapdog. The postman came almost every day. It was his job to come, and he would take Gormley's letters off and deliver them. He had to every stupid, soft, happy, sappy family. The postman was weak, a sheep, a zombie, an instrument. The postman had no power over Gormley now. It was he who was the puppet master. No, the preacher. No, the savior of the world. And if the world couldn't learn from him, then, as far as Gormley was concerned, it deserved to suffer blindly in darkness. But today the postman was terribly late, and Gormley was beginning to worry. Maybe the authorities were monitoring his mail. Maybe they were fitting the postman with high-definition cameras and microphones. Gormley hadn't been caught and punished for doing something bad since he was a child. He learned to be careful. Never once had he even received a response from a vengeful, grieving parent. Of course, he never revealed his identity. But you never know how somebody can find you out nowadays. His saliva could have been pulled from all the stamps and envelopes. It could have been collected in a vial in some refrigerated vault somewhere deep below the Pentagon. Perhaps the authorities were just biding time, amassing evidence. Gormley had done nothing really wrong, of course. He'd never killed anybody. He'd never touched any children. Gormley didn't know too much about the law, but whatever they could charge him with, he knew they couldn't just send him to prison, even if they did drag him to trial.
Over what? A few letters? A few hard truths?
he'd have the opportunity to preach his cold gospel to the world.
And the court here intends to prove that this man is responsible for sending these letters to these poor, grieving parents.
I ain't done anything wrong. Don't you see? I'm helping these people. Helping them. I'm helping them to get over their grief. What have you done to help with their grief? What have you done? What have any of you done for them? I've brought their pain back, yeah. I made them feel everything. But then I helped them move on, to get past it. The filthy smiles, the happiness, they need to get past it, don't you understand? They need to get by it. They need to understand what this world is really about. What demons really lurk in this world.
And his arguments would be so convincing that the lawyers and the judge and the jury and the families in the courtroom and the journalists and all the people at home watching on TV would open their collective eyes to reality. Everyone would finally see the real, cold, hard truth. Then people would start acting accordingly. Then the world and everyone in it would start getting real instead of play acting in the same sick, tired old farce. Would getting caught really be so bad then? Gormley considered this for a moment. Probably. Probably yes. People are stupid. They simply wouldn't understand. Gormley couldn't go to prison. He wasn't as tough as he had been in his youth, not physically anyway. And prison was full of men much tougher than he. No, getting caught was out of the question. He'd sooner die. Gormley's stomach ached. Too much caffeine and sugar. Too much worry. He debated walking to the mailbox, taking the letter, and trying again the next day. Perhaps he would write another draft after a short nap. But if he were being watched, retrieving a letter from his mailbox would appear quite suspicious to prying eyes. Would it not? Another thought occurred to him. What if one of the real abductors had learnt of his letters? What if some psychopath child killer was out there lurking in the fog, wearing a bloody postman's uniform and waiting for Gormley to take that long, lonely walk to his mailbox? Surely, at least a few maniacs resented his taking credit for their deeds. Gormley wrung his hands. He scurried to his door to check the locks. His trailer creaked on its cinder block legs. The fog outside had lifted. It had turned from Hyperborean gray to dingy yellow. Was it really so late in the day? Gormley swiped his phone from the nightstand. It was dead. He'd checked it not long ago. That's how he was so sure the postman was late, and it had been fully charged. His old desktop didn't fire up either. He pulled the chain on a nearby lamp and no light emerged from behind the shade. It was a blackout. Perhaps they were working on the line somewhere out there. Perhaps it was the police, and in an instant they were going to kick his door down and blast him with tear gas. Or perhaps it was a madman with an axe. Such speculation was no good. It provoked far too much anxiety. Gormley considered the fact that he hadn't actually talked to another human being in a week or two. He'd barely left the trailer, save to check the mail. and his diet had been especially terrible during the time he was focused on his letters. It was the isolation and the caffeine and the lack of sleep making him worry. It was all of that, and the damned postman. Today of all days he was late. It just all felt too inauspicious. Was it getting darker? Gormley pulled a candle from a drawer. It couldn't have been later than 10 a.m. Was his vision failing? Too much time in the dark, in front of a computer screen? He returned to his kitchenette, lit the candle, and placed it on the table in front of him. The world beyond the flame in the solitary window had grown ever darker. It appeared to be dusk, though there was no way of discerning the sun's position in the fog, which had thickened just as quickly as the daylight had waned. It rolled over Gormley's property, obscuring his view of the mailbox in blank sheets of oblivion.
I must be tired.
The phrase repeated itself in his head over and over. His mind and body swung from nervous tension to outright lethargy.
I must be tired. I gotta lie down.
He wasn't sure of what he was telling himself, but he slowly rose to his feet with the candle, reluctantly breaking his gaze on the shrouded world outside, and he shuffled to his room at the opposite end of the trailer. He observed how quiet it was. There was only the groan of his footsteps. There were no birds or furry little things scampering through the trees outside. Even if the day was really over, the usual hum of night insects was strangely absent. It was sound dampening technology, it had to be. They were screwing with him, watching him from the woods. He was almost sure of it. But who were they? Do maniacs have access to the kind of engineering necessary for this sort of production? Gormley banished the thought from his mind. He slipped into his bed and piled the covers around him. It was the police. They were trying to break him. Well, they didn't know whom they were harassing. First thing in the morning, he'd go to town. He'd mail his letter personally. Then he'd go to the police station and confront them. He'd force them to play their hand. And what? Then he'd go to jail? Certainly not. Certainly not that. So what then? Well, he'd think of it. He'd think of something. Perhaps to a lawyer first. Yes, a lawyer. He had options. He wasn't a poor man, and he certainly wasn't a fool. Yes, he'd mail his letter. Then talk to a lawyer. But his letter. He'd have to get his letter. He'd have to get out of bed. He'd have to leave his trailer. He'd have to walk that long walk down to the mailbox in the darkness and fog.
I can stay in the box overnight. No harm in that. Just one night. And if the postman comes before I'm up, that saves me a trip.
Gormley flopped from one side to the other and faced the wall. The candle's flicker cast odd shadows and stretched his own deformed silhouette across the false wood paneling. His eyes were weighty and felt dry and raw. He'd hoped to end his day in the same manner he always did after a successful missive assault. by fantasizing about some little child's mother or father opening his envelope and reading his letter. He would imagine the color draining from their faces, the tears welling in their eyes, the wailing and gnashing of teeth. Gormley cursed his anonymity. He wanted the parents to write him back. One time, he had chanced upon the mother of one of his lost children responding on TV to the letter he'd sent. The failure in her words, the stupidity in her voice, it was all so predictably perfect. Gormley had downloaded the video clip from the show and replayed it often when he felt the urge to do impure things. Gormley fell asleep. Swirling dreams rushed through his agitated brain with foggy visions of crying mothers, smiling children, SWAT teams and serial killers, and of course, the postman, his wretched slave.
Make that face at me, boy. I swear to God, I'll break your fucking scrawny little neck. You and your fucking mother's the same. You're just the same. Worthless piece of shit. No, you're not. No, Daddy. No.
He awoke at an unfamiliar time to a hard single knock at his door. His candle had burned itself out, but he could see scant light coming from the kitchenette window at the trailer's opposite end. He sat nervously in a dull room. It was as if he hadn't slept a wink. Another hard, hammering knock at the door. A battering ram? Or worse, an axe? Then Gormley heard something in the silence outside. Someone was moving from the front door to his side of the trailer in excruciatingly slow, plodding steps. There was also a scraping, sliding noise advancing across the metal exterior. Something pressed heavily against the trailer, causing it to sigh like the hull of an ancient ship, set adrift in the fog. And Gormley could hear the breathing. The slow, labored breathing of clogged, elderly lungs. The movement stopped just outside of Gormley's bedroom. The wall creaked vaguely, and the breathing grew louder. The visitor outside was listening, pressing their head to the wall. Gormley held his breath. He tightened his blanket against his chest to muffle the sound of his heartbeat. Untold time passed while Gormley sat paralyzed by the croaking rhythm of the breathing outside. Then the panting rose to a furor, and the insidious invisible presence spoke in low, sustained, dripping tones.
Francis Gormley! Come on out here. Got a package for you, boy.
The voice was a mockery of something recognizable. It was glottal and reptilian, conjuring up a pallid but unmistakable memory. Gormley's leaden heart began to sink. He wet himself, and the caffeine was to blame. After a moment, the owner of the voice outside started a slow, creeping limp back toward the front door. Gormley considered barricading it, but he doubted he had time. Whoever it was outside had heavy fists and could have battered the door down with minimal effort. A kitchen knife was the only accessible means of defense. The stranger was almost to the door. Gormley shook free from vacillation and nearly tripped over the blanket as he tore out of his room. His heavy footsteps shook the floor. Just as he passed the threshold, another solid thump on the door froze him in place.
Francis!
The anger in the stranger's voice was palpable.
Get out here, boy. I got deliveries. Can't be out here all damn night.
His final word was punctuated with another powerful knock. The aluminum surface of the door was undoubtedly dented, and Gormley heard the splintering of cheap wood. For the first time since a childhood of drunken words and drunken hands ossified in his memory, despite every attempt to forget, Gormley felt the urge to cry, to scream for help. But who would help him? Gormley tried to speak, and it took more effort than he'd anticipated. His voice came out in cracks and squeaks.
I can't be bothered just now. Come back tomorrow.
The trespasser's heavy gasps mutated into a sickening chuckle.
Oh, I'll be back tomorrow. I'll be back tomorrow to be sure, boy.
Gormley heard the intruder turn and begin to stagger away. Gormley ran to the cutlery drawer and rummaged for the largest knife he could find. It was dreadfully dark outside, and the light that seeped in through the window belonged to a pair of fog lights at the end of the driveway. Gormley squinted and spied the tall, hunched, bleary shape of a man in a rounded postman's hat hobbling back towards the source of the lights. The man was moving so slowly that his lame steps seemed to take place in a kind of bizarre time-lapse photography. Upon reaching the end of the drive, the figure, bathed in the fog lights, turned to Gormley's mailbox and lingered.
Leave! Just leave!
Gormley whispered aggressively. He wanted to repeat himself more loudly and forcefully, but before he could utter them again, the man turned back as though he'd already heard.
I hear you.
At once the fog lights intensified, taking the shape of two huge, bulging, orb-like eyes, and the face of the postman appeared in full view, directly outside the window. The ghastly being curled its thin lips and gaped at him with a riven, rotten-toothed mouth that billowed fog in foul expiration. Mottled yellow-gray skin hung from a skull wreathed in patches of dead, white hair. The postman's fog-light eyes flashed and burned as he let out a protracted scream. Then, the moldy jaws clenched and he ground his jagged teeth together in a hateful, decayed grimace. At that moment, a blinding white sting hit Gormley directly in his eyes. He clutched at his face and fell away from the window, tumbling over the table and back first onto the linoleum floor. Gormley screamed. The razor-thin edge of some spectral blade had slashed deep into each eyeball. His hands were warm and wet with tears and blood and something else. Something thicker. He could feel it oozing down his face and puddling the floor. The pain was excruciating, like the worst paper cut imaginable in the most delicate and sensitive of places. The angry, feculent voice of the postman hissed.
You're gonna lose more than your eyes, Francis. I'm coming tomorrow, and I'm gonna take your fat little fingers, and then I'll come the next night and take your tongue. I'll split it right down the middle, boy. And then there'll be no more bad words from you.
The postman's horrid laughter resounded inside the trailer. Gormley felt the stinking, humid breath on his face. It was a sickly, familiar mixture of soil, stale beer, and rotten fish. Then, suddenly, nothing. Silence for what felt like an eternity. At last, Gormley heard the mail truck pull out onto the blacktop road with a rusty screech and slowly drive away, taking the darkness with it. Gormley heard the pleasant sounds of the day, the birds and the furry little animals busying themselves amongst the trees. But Gormley's nightmare remained. Fear overrode the pain in his lacerated eyes. The postman would come back. He was sure of it. And who knew how long the day would last? Time meant nothing now. Gormley had to get out. He had to find people. Perhaps prison wasn't such a bad option. Maybe they'd take pity on a blind man. At the very least, he wouldn't be alone. Gormley pulled himself to his feet and groped for the door. He had to put a shoulder to it to get it to open. And when it did, he tripped over a large object at his feet. He felt that it was a package wrapped in paper. He was afraid to open it, but he shook it and could distinguish the unmistakable rustling of envelopes within. Then the faint sounds of laughing children surrounded him. Gormley's throat felt constricted and sour, and he wished he'd had a peppermint. He picked up the package and with great trepidation made his way to the blacktop road at the end of the drive. Gormley pointed himself toward town and wandered off blindly in the vaporous morning fog.
Thanks for listening. I'm voice actor Steve Taylor, and I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed what you've heard, please show your support by hitting the thumbs up icon and click the subscribe button. And don't forget to hit the bell notification icon too to make sure you never miss a new release from from Chilling Tales for Dark Nights. Want more horror than you can handle? Sign up as a patron today at chillingtalesfordarknights.com/join and get instant access to hundreds of extended podcast episodes and our audio archive going back to 2012. All of it ad-free and available for download. To reward you for your bravery in finishing this collection of frightening tales, we'd like to sweeten the deal. Use promo code CHILL30. That's CHILL30, CHILL30 at checkout to get your first month of any monthly membership absolutely free. And finally, check out the video description below for links to more frightening fiction, including simplyscarypodcast.com, where you'll find new episodes available each and every week. Thank you again for your support. And until next time, turn off the lights and turn on the dark.
Chilling Tales for Dark Nights.